Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and tap the like button. It helps more than you know. My mother's silence was the first sound I ever knew. Not the soft cooing of lullabies, not the warm hum of comfort, but silence that hung in the rooms like heavy curtains, muffling everything that might have been tender. I remember lying in my narrow bed as a child, staring at the cracked ceiling above me, waiting for her voice to break through the stillness. Sometimes I thought if I listened hard enough, I would hear the words she never spoke, like they were hiding inside the creaking of the old house, in the whispers of the wind slipping under the door. But she remained mute, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes distant, as though she carried a world locked inside her chest that she would not, or could not, share. There was a clock on the kitchen wall, an ugly square thing with hands that twitched instead of glided. It ticked louder than anything else in the house, each second a reminder of the emptiness between us. I came to fear that clock. Its sound meant another minute had passed without a word, another moment where my mother chose silence over me. And yet, I clung to it too, because the ticking was at least proof of life, proof that time had not yet swallowed us whole. I used to follow her shadow through the narrow hallways, watching how she moved, as though burdened by chains no one could see. Her silence wasn't gentle. It was suffocating. When she set the bread on the table or folded the laundry, her movements were mechanical, deliberate, as if she was afraid of betraying something with even the slightest gesture. Sometimes, in the evenings, she would sit by the window and stare at the garden until the light faded, her reflection merging with the glass. I would stand behind her, small and trembling, and see both of us there. Her face pale and unreadable, mine filled with questions I never dared to ask. My father was no help. He filled the void with his own brand of cruelty, loud, violent words that rattled the walls and made the silence afterwards even heavier. He was a man who wanted to be obeyed, not understood. If I cried too long, his belt came down. If I asked too much, his hand silenced me. Between his noise and her silence, I grew up learning that my own voice was dangerous. But there were moments, small, fragile, like the flicker of a candle in the wind, when I felt something stir in her. Once I woke in the middle of the night and found her standing in the kitchen, her hand hovering over the clock as though she wanted to rip it off the wall. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her eyes burned with a fury I had never seen before. I watched from the doorway, my bare feet cold on the tiles, until she finally dropped her hand and went back to her room without a sound. Another time, when I was maybe 7, I cut my knee badly in the garden. Blood streamed down my leg, and for the first time, I saw her panic. She rushed to me, her hands trembling as she pressed a cloth to the wound. Her lips parted, and for an instant I hoped she might finally say something. But no words came. Only her shallow breathing, quick and desperate, and the faint smell of iron from the blood between us. That silence became the rhythm of my childhood, a rhythm I both hated and clung to. And as I grew older, I realized something was wrong, terribly wrong, beneath it. Silence like hers wasn't born from shyness or timidity. It was born from secrets. Heavy, festering secrets that threatened to spill out if she opened her mouth even once. It wasn't until she lay on her deathbed, her frail body swallowed by the white sheets, that she finally broke the pattern of her life. I was at her side, holding her hand cold, papery, fragile, like an autumn leaf, and I whispered that I was there, that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. Her lips moved, barely, and at first I thought it was another empty gesture. But then the sound came, raspy, cracked, like stones scraping together. She whispered something so dark, so monstrous, that it hollowed out everything I thought I knew about her, about my childhood, about myself. Her silence had been a prison, but also a shield. And in her last breath, she lowered the shield and let the nightmare crawl into me. Don't forget, if this story pulls you in, to subscribe and leave a comment. It means the world. The secret was about my father, or at least the man I had always called my father. She told me he was not the man I thought, not truly. She said he had taken her when she was young, much younger than I had ever known, and broken her into silence. He was not just cruel. He was the architect of her muteness. The reason her voice had been stolen from her throat, and worse, far worse, she said I was the proof of that violence, that I was born from it. The room spun when she said it. The beeping machines, the stale hospital smell, the dim light flickering above her bed, all of it collapsed into a haze. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to cover her mouth and beg her to take the words back. But she was fading, her eyes already half closed, her chest rising and falling in shallow waves. And I understood then the silence had not been her choice. It had been her survival. When her hand slipped from mine, I felt the world tilt. The clock on the hospital wall ticked in harsh mechanical beats, dragging me back to the same sound that had haunted me as a child. Time was moving forward, but I was trapped in the echo of her words, in the horror of what she had carried alone all those years. And yet, somewhere deep in me, I felt the smallest flicker of something else, rage, yes, but also clarity. Her silence had shaped me, had scarred me, but now her voice, her one, final whisper was the seed of something new. I could no longer be silent. Don't forget to like and comment if you're still listening. It helps me keep going. The days after her death blurred together. I walked through the house she left behind, each room filled with shadows that now had names. The clock was still there, ticking, relentless. I wanted to smash it, to silence it forever, but I didn't. Instead, I listened. Because inside that ticking, I thought I could still hear her, the mother I never really knew. Breathing, waiting, urging me to uncover the full truth. And that was the beginning of the descent. The moment when my life, once defined by her silence, began to unravel into her secret. I could not sleep in those first nights after her passing. The bed felt foreign. The sheets clung to my skin like damp hands, and in the silence of the house, I heard things that were not there, or perhaps had always been there, waiting for me to notice. The creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps pacing outside my door. The rustle of curtains became whispers, the kind I had imagined as a child, when I thought my mother's words might have slipped out and hidden themselves in the corners of the house. Now, after her deathbed confession, I realized those whispers were never make-believe. They were fragments of what she had buried, trying to reach me through the walls. I walked through her things slowly, carefully, afraid of what I might find, but even more afraid of leaving them untouched. Her wardrobe still smelled faintly of lavender, though the scent was faint, like it was dissolving into the dust. I found boxes stacked neatly on the top shelf, filled with folded linens, yellowed photographs, and letters that had never been sent. Her handwriting was small, tight, as though even on paper she feared someone would pry too deeply. None of the letters were addressed, just lines and lines of words scratched out halfway through, aborted sentences like broken breaths. I tried to piece them together, but they were fragments, not confessions. There was one thing, though, a small brass key hidden in the hem of one of her dresses. I almost missed it, the thread holding it in place so fine I thought at first it was a snag. The key was old, heavy for its size, and worn smooth, as though handled too often. I turned it over in my palm, my heart racing. My mother had kept this close to her body, stitched into her clothing, as if it were both her anchor and her curse. I knew it must belong to something in the house, but I could not guess what. The thought consumed me. I searched drawers, cupboards, old chests, but found no lock that would match it. Days stretched into weeks, and still the question pressed on me. I began to dream of the key, of my mother's pale fingers pressing it into my hand with eyes that finally spoke, eyes that begged me to unlock the silence. Each morning, I woke with the impression that I had been standing in front of some hidden door all night, too afraid to turn the key. Meanwhile, the words she had whispered on her deathbed gnawed at me. The man I called father, he had not just been cruel. He had taken her, forced her, built our lives on violence. I replayed every memory I had of him, looking for cracks, and suddenly they were everywhere. The sharpness of his gaze, the weight of his presence, the way even silence bent under his shadow. He had died years earlier, leaving only his voice in my mind, barking orders, cutting down my small rebellions. Now I realized he had left more than scars. He had left a truth so vile that my mother had buried it beneath decades of muteness. One evening, as dusk fell, and the house filled with that strange half-light that makes shadows longer than they should be, I heard it, a hollow echo, faint, behind the pantry wall. I pressed my ear against the plaster, and for the first time I noticed what had always been there. A seam, subtle but clear, where the wood met stone unevenly. My breath caught. My hand went instinctively to the pocket where I kept the brass key. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to like. It keeps these stories alive. Oh, the lock was hidden, a small iron slot tucked just beneath the baseboard. I had walked past it 1,000 times and never seen it, but now it glared at me like an open wound. My hand trembled as I slid the key into the slot. It fit perfectly. For a long moment, I couldn't turn it. My pulse roared in my ears, and I thought of my mother sitting wordless in this house, guarding something she could not speak of. Finally, I twisted. The sound was terrible, a grinding screech of old metal. The panel shifted, then opened, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. A breath of cold, stale air rushed up to meet me, carrying with it a smell that froze me where I stood. Mildew, rot, and something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. I covered my mouth, but the stench slid inside me anyway. I should have closed it. I should have locked it again, stitched the key back into the dress, and buried it all with my mother. But her whisper echoed in me, the secret she had carried like a curse. I stepped inside. The stairs groaned under my weight. The deeper I went, the colder it grew, until the air felt damp against my skin. The light from above faded quickly, swallowed by the dark, and I had only a small candle clutched in my hand to keep the shadows at bay. The flame trembled, as though it feared what lay below. At the bottom was a room, not large, but close, suffocating. The walls were lined with shelves, and on them sat jars, boxes, and bundles wrapped in cloth. My candlelight flickered across strange shapes. Bones, small and delicate, too human to mistake for animals. My stomach lurched, and I staggered back against the wall, my breath ragged. There were notebooks, too, stacked high, their pages filled with cramped handwriting that was not my mother's. I recognized the sharp slanted scrawl. It was his. I picked one up, my fingers trembling. The ink had bled in places from damp, but the words were still legible. What I read made the air vanish from the room. He had written everything, his justifications, his rituals, his belief that silence and fear were stronger than love. He wrote of my mother, of how he had taken her voice, of how children were not born but broken into the world. He wrote of me. I dropped the notebook, my hands shaking so violently the candle almost fell. The shadows leapt against the walls, and for a moment I thought I saw faces there, pale and watching. But it was only the flame's cruel trick. Still, I fled. I ran up the stairs, slammed the panel shut, and pressed my back against it until my lungs burned. Don't forget to leave a comment, to subscribe, and to like it matters more than you think. That night, I dreamed again of my mother at the kitchen clock, her hand raised, her lips parting. But this time she spoke, not in whispers, but in screams that echoed through the house, shattering every window. I woke drenched in sweat, the sound of her voice still ringing in my ears. And I knew then, her silence had not died with her. It lived in me now, and if I did not uncover every secret in that hidden room, I would drown in it too. The morning after that dream, I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth, as though I had bitten down on blood in my sleep. The house felt hostile, each creak of the wood, each shiver of the glass panes carrying a weight I could no longer ignore. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the clock. Its hands twitched forward with that same merciless stutter, dragging me back into the rhythm I had hated since childhood. I felt my mother's presence there, not as comfort, but as a reminder. Her silence had been her prison, and if I wasn't careful, it would become mine. I couldn't stop thinking about the notebooks. The few words I had read were enough to rot my stomach, but they were only fragments. I knew that room held more, perhaps all of it. And though I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen what I had seen, the truth gnawed at me. It demanded to be uncovered. I carried the key in my pocket all day, the weight of it pressing against my thigh like a brand. Every step I took, I heard it clink faintly, reminding me that the door was still waiting. When night fell again, I lit a lantern instead of a candle. The flame inside it burned steadier, though it still trembled against the drafts of the old house. I opened the panel once more, the screech of the lock setting my teeth on edge, and I descended into the dark. The smell hit me first again, mildew, damp earth, and that faint metallic tang. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself down, one trembling step at a time. In the room, I set the lantern on the ground. Its glow spread further than the candle had, illuminating the walls more fully. The shelves stretched higher than I remembered, crammed with jars. Some contained yellowed scraps of paper. Others held objects I could not name, cloth tied with twine. Metal tools rusted over, fragments of glass, and in some, bones again, so small. My throat closed as I realized many were not animal remains. Some were delicate hands, some were jawbones with tiny teeth. The lantern flickered, and I couldn't bear to look at them for long. I turned instead to the notebooks. There were dozens, stacked neatly as though placed with care. My hand hesitated above them, the way one might hesitate above a coffin. When I finally opened another, the handwriting stabbed into me. The words ran on and on, like the rantings of a man who believed he was not only beyond reproach, but chosen. He wrote of silence as a discipline, as a form of control. He believed that if you could strip sound from a person, you could own them completely. He wrote of my mother, of how he had broken her voice until she lived in fear of hearing her own words. He called it purification. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to like. Your voice matters more than you think. I forced myself to keep reading. The notebook grew darker with each page. He described rituals he performed in that room as if it were a sanctuary. He spoke of children, not only me, but others, though the details blurred in places, smudged ink or deliberate scratches across the paper. He spoke of unfinished works, of silence born too soon. The bones on the shelves were not nameless. They were part of his obsession, his twisted belief that silence could be sculpted into purity. My hands shook so violently the pages crumpled. I dropped the notebook, and the lantern light caught on the glass jars again, throwing distorted shadows across the walls. For a moment, the shadows seemed to move on their own, shifting like figures reaching toward me. I stumbled back against the shelf, and one of the jars toppled, shattering on the stone floor. A smell rushed up, sour, decayed, unbearable. I gagged, pressing my sleeve to my face, and through the rising stench I thought I heard something else. A faint hum. It was impossible, I told myself, but it was there, so low it was almost under the threshold of hearing. It came from the broken remains of the jar, or perhaps from the walls themselves. A vibration more than a sound. I froze, my body rigid, listening. It was like the echo of a voice too old to belong to the living. I ran then. I left the shards where they fell, grabbed the lantern, and fled up the stairs. I slammed the panel shut behind me, my chest heaving. My skin crawled, the hum still echoing inside my bones. I leaned against the wall, shaking, and in that silence above ground, I realized something that chilled me even more than what I had read. My mother hadn't just been hiding his crimes. She had been guarding us from him, yes, but from what he left behind too. For nights afterward, I dreamed of the hum. Sometimes it was the clock in the kitchen ticking too loudly, morphing into a droning chant. Sometimes it was my mother's voice, finally speaking, but in a tone I didn't recognize, her mouth opening wider and wider until it swallowed the room. I woke, gasping, the sheets twisted around me, my throat raw, as though I had been screaming. Still, I returned. I couldn't stay away. Every day I resisted, but every night the pull grew stronger. The notebooks had answers, horrible ones, yes, but answers. And I had lived my whole life with questions that silence had refused to resolve. So I went back, again and again, reading deeper into his madness. Don't forget, if you're still here, to leave a comment, to subscribe, and to press like it helps me not feel so alone in this telling. The further I read, the more the lines between memory and discovery blurred. I began to see his face in the words, hear his voice in the scratch of the pen. He wrote as though he knew I would one day read it, as if the books were not records, but instructions. He described me, not as a child, not even as his, but as a vessel. Born of silence, carried in shadow, he wrote, she will bear the weight when the time comes. I dropped the book, my blood running cold. The words repeated in my head until I thought I would lose my mind. Bear the weight? The time? He had written this decades ago, before I could even understand language, and yet it was addressed to me. The walls of the room seemed to pulse then, as if the stone itself remembered. My lantern flickered, throwing the same shadows as before, the same reaching figures. I could not stay. I rushed out again, locking the panel behind me, but the words followed me up, clinging like smoke. At night, I began to hear footsteps in the hall again, slow, deliberate, dragging. I told myself it was my imagination, but sometimes I smelled the same stench from the cellar rising through the floorboards. Sometimes I heard the faint hum, vibrating just beneath the ticking of the kitchen clock. And worst of all, sometimes I heard my mother's voice. Not whispering this time, but calling my name. I tried to ignore the voice at first, convincing myself it was a dream, an echo of grief that clung to the air after her death. But grief does not repeat itself with such precision. Grief does not call your name at the same hour each night with the same cadence, the same soft syllables that are both tender and unbearable. At first it was faint, like a memory, barely brushing my ears. Then, night by night, it grew clearer, as though the walls themselves were carrying her breath. I would sit in the kitchen long after midnight, the lantern guttering low, the clock ticking too loud, and I would hear it again. My name, stretched thin, pulled through the darkness like thread. I wanted to answer, to open my mouth and call back to her, but fear glued my tongue in place. My mother had spent her life guarding her silence, and now in death she was breaking it. That thought filled me with dread. One night I couldn't stand it any longer. I rose from the table, the floor groaning beneath me, and followed the sound down the hallway. My bare feet were cold against the boards, my breath shallow. The whisper led me to the pantry door, the very place where the hidden panel lay. I pressed my palm flat against the wood, and the voice ceased, as if it had been waiting for me to arrive. I slid the key into the lock again, my hand trembling, and opened the passage. The cold dampness rushed up, wrapping itself around me like a shroud. The lantern flame bent sideways in the draught, casting shadows that stretched and warped. I went down, the voice guiding me, though it no longer spoke aloud. It was inside me now, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. The cellar looked different this time, or perhaps it was only me who had changed. The jars seemed more numerous, the bones more blatant. I could not look too long at them without feeling my stomach churn. But the notebooks drew me in again. I opened another at random, and the words leapt out like barbs. He had written about the house itself, about how walls could be shaped to hold more than air, how silence could seep into stone and wood until it became a kind of vessel. He wrote of binding, of keeping what was restless still. I read the sentences over and over until their meaning sank into me like ice. My mother had not been the only prisoner here. The house itself was a cage, and he had built it deliberately. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to like. It keeps me breathing as I tell you this. I slammed the book shut, my hands trembling, but I could not put it down. I carried it upstairs into the kitchen and sat under the clock with its relentless tick. I read until dawn, my eyes burning, the words etching themselves into me. He had written of me again. She is the key. She will unlock what I could not. The words blurred as the first light seeped through the curtains. I looked up and saw my reflection faintly in the kitchen window. My face pale, eyes hollow, hair clinging to my temples. For a moment, it wasn't my reflection at all. It was hers, my mother's. She stood in the glass, lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Then the image flickered, and it was only me again. I closed the book and hid it in the drawer, but the knowledge could not be hidden. I carried it with me through the day, through the silence of the house. The ticking of the clock seemed louder now, its twitching hands jerking like nervous fingers. At times, I thought it wasn't measuring time at all, but something else, counting down, or holding rhythm with the heartbeat of the house. That night the voice came again, stronger, clearer. It said only one thing, down. I obeyed. Lantern in hand, I descended once more. My stomach knotted, the key still warm from my grip. I walked into the cellar, the shadows pressing close, the smell sharper now, almost unbearable. I set the lantern on the floor, and its glow spilled into the corners I had not dared look at before. There was more than shelves here. At the far end, behind a cluster of jars, was a mirror. It was cracked through the center, the glass warped, but it stood tall against the wall like a sentinel. Dust lay thick across its frame, and yet the surface shimmered faintly, as though it had been waiting for light. I approached slowly, my pulse hammering. When I finally stood before it, I expected my own reflection. Instead, I saw her, my mother, not as she had been on her deathbed, frail and fading, but as she had been in my childhood, silent, pale, her lips pressed shut. She looked at me with the same unreadable eyes, and then she raised her hand, pressing it against the glass. My own hand lifted, trembling, until my palm met hers. The glass was cold, but beneath it, I felt something move. As though her hand pressed back, I staggered away, my heart racing, but the image did not fade. She was still there, staring, her lips finally parting. And though no sound came, I knew what she was saying. The silence is not empty. It is waiting. The lantern sputtered then, throwing wild shadows, and I turned away from the mirror. The hum rose again, low and steady, filling the room until my teeth ached. The notebooks rustled on their shelves as if stirred by a breeze, though the air was still. I ran, abandoning the lantern, climbing the stairs 2 at a time, slamming the panel shut behind me. But even upstairs, in the light of morning, I knew the truth. I could not escape. The silence lived in the walls, in the clock, in the reflection of every mirror in the house. And it was growing stronger, now that her voice had finally broken through. Don't forget to leave a comment, to like, to subscribe. It helps me not drown in this silence as I go on. The days blurred after that. Though blur is too soft a word, it was more like a smearing, as if reality itself had been dragged by rough fingers across a damp canvas. Morning bled into night, and night into a restless half-light that clung to the house like cobwebs. I stopped leaving. The world beyond the front door seemed distant, irrelevant, almost dangerous. The air outside was bright and thin, while in here it was thick, weighted, vibrating with something ancient that I could neither name nor escape. I stopped eating properly. The bread I left on the counter grew hard, green with mold. The milk soured in the jug. Still, I sat at the kitchen table under the clock, reading those notebooks, one by one, as if they were scripture I could not resist. My father's handwriting carved itself into my mind, the angles of each letter sharp enough to cut. He wrote about silence as if it were alive, not a lack, but a presence. He called it the hollow. He said it fed on sound, on voice, on breath, until what was left was pure and obedient. It made sense of her life, her stillness, her lips pressed close like a wound, but it made no sense of my own. Why had I been allowed to speak, even as a child? Why had he not sealed my mouth too, forced me into muteness? The answer came in fragments, scattered across the notebooks, but when pieced together, they chilled me. He had not silenced me, because he believed I was meant to be something else. A vessel, a continuation. The silence did not want me quiet. It wanted me to carry it further. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to like. It means more than you know, and it keeps me able to speak. Sleep became impossible. When I closed my eyes, the hum came louder, shaking through the marrow of my bones. Sometimes I felt it in my teeth, a low vibration that rattled against my skull. Sometimes it surged like a wave through the floorboards, lifting me from the bed until I woke gasping, convinced I had floated inches above the mattress. The mirror haunted me most of all. Even when I avoided the cellar, I dreamed of its cracked surface, dreamed of my mother standing behind it, her hand pressed to the glass, her eyes demanding I return. One night, I woke to the sound of glass shattering. I stumbled barefoot into the hallway, heart pounding, expecting to find a broken window. But every pane of glass was intact. I turned toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. The clock on the wall had fallen, its glass face fractured down the center like the mirror below. Its hands still twitched, but the sound was wrong now. Too loud, each tick echoing through the house like a hammer strike. I stared at the crack running through it, and my stomach sank. It was the same fracture as in the mirror. The house was splitting, aligning itself with whatever he had built beneath. I carried the broken clock into the cellar the next morning. I don't know why. I only knew it belonged there. The mirror seemed to shimmer as I entered, its fractured surface catching the lantern light. I held the clock up to it, and for a moment the cracks aligned perfectly, as though they were pieces of the same whole. My mother's face appeared again in the glass, paler now, her lips moving in silent words I could not hear. I pressed closer, desperate to understand, but the hum drowned everything. It swelled until my ears rang, until I tasted blood in the back of my throat. I dropped the clock, and it shattered fully on the stone floor. The hum ceased instantly. The silence that followed was worse. I backed away, but my eyes caught on something I hadn't noticed before. A small iron box on the shelf beneath the mirror. I don't know how I'd missed it. Perhaps it hadn't been there before. The brass key burned hot in my pocket, almost as if it wanted me to use it. My hands shook as I pulled it out and fit it into the box. It turned smoothly, as though it had always been waiting for this. Inside was a bundle of cloth, stiff with age. I unwrapped it slowly, the dust rising in choking clouds, until I saw what lay within. Another notebook, smaller, bound in leather so dark it looked almost black. This one was not in his hand. The script was finer, neater, each line careful and deliberate. It was hers, my mother's. My breath caught. She had never spoken, never written to me, never explained herself in life, but here she had written. My hands trembled as I turned the first page. If you are reading this, it means the silence has found you, as it found me. I kept my voice locked away so that it would not grow stronger. He thought he was its master, but he was only its servant. It uses us. It always has. I could not destroy it. I could only delay it. You are my delay. Forgive me. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. She had not been silent by choice. She had been protecting me, protecting the world, by starving the silence of her voice. Her life had been an act of resistance, though it had looked like surrender. And now, by speaking, by reading aloud even fragments of his words in my head, I had already broken what she had preserved. Don't forget to leave a comment, to like, and to subscribe, because speaking into the silence keeps it from swallowing me whole. I read on, though my hands wanted to close the book, though my heart begged me to stop. She wrote of the house, of the cellar, of the mirror. She said it was not just a reflection, but a doorway. The silence lived behind it, waiting. It could not cross without a voice to guide it, without someone to open themselves as a vessel. He had wanted me for that purpose. She had kept me safe by staying mute, by never letting the silence pass through her to me. But on her deathbed, in that final whisper, she had faltered. She had opened the door just enough for it to slip into me. I dropped the notebook, clutching my chest as if to tear something out. I felt it then. The hum was not only in the house, it was in me. Every breath, every heartbeat carried its rhythm. I staggered back, staring at the mirror. My mother's face had vanished. In its place, I saw only darkness, thick and shifting, as though something vast waited just beyond the crack. The silence was no longer content with walls and shadows. It wanted me. I fled again, but the house no longer offered safety. Every corner whispered. Every mirror held flickers of movement that vanished when I turned my head. The clock's absence made the silence louder, heavier, as if time itself had abandoned me. I sat on the floor of the kitchen, clutching my mother's notebook to my chest, and wept, not for her, not for him, but for myself. Because I knew, no matter how far I ran, no matter how I resisted, the silence had already found its home in me, and it would not let go. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment. Because maybe your voice can reach me, even if mine is already lost. I began to notice it in small ways first. The proof that the silence was no longer outside me, but inside. When I tried to hum to myself in the evenings, a habit I'd carried since girlhood, the notes died in my throat, collapsing into nothing before they reached the air. My lips moved, but no sound came. It was as though the silence was swallowing the tones before they could escape. I would slam the drawer of the table shut, just to hear the bang, but the sound was dull, muffled, like hitting a pillow instead of wood. Even the rain outside no longer struck the windows with its old ferocity. It slid down the glass in silence, each drop muted. At first, I thought I was losing my hearing. I pressed my hands to my ears. I shouted into empty rooms, but my voice never came back to me. Then I realized it wasn't the world that was quiet. It was me. The silence was filtering reality through me, muting everything that touched my skin, everything I tried to let out. I turned to my mother's notebook again, searching for guidance. Her words were sparse, but sharp, as if each one had been dragged out of her like blood. The silence will trick you into believing it is absence. It is not. It is hunger. It feeds on what you deny it. It grows in the gaps where words should be. That line cut through me. I remembered all the times I had begged her to speak, to break her silence, and how she had turned away, her lips pressed tight, her eyes hollow. I had thought she was cold, but now I understood. Each word she refused was a sacrifice, each silence a battle. She had been starving it her whole life, and now I was feeding it without even realizing. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to like. Your sound, your words, are the only ones I have left to hold on to. The house grew heavier with each day. I would walk into a room and feel the air pressing down, as though invisible hands were pushing against my shoulders. The mirrors became treacherous. At first they only showed fleeting movements, shadows darting where none should be. But then they began to change more. When I passed the one in the hallway, I would see myself stop walking, even though I had not. She, the other me, stood staring back, lips slightly parted, eyes unblinking, while I hurried on. I covered the mirrors with sheets, but the fabric bulged sometimes, as if something pressed from the other side. The hum returned in waves, sometimes faint, sometimes so loud my teeth rattled. It came strongest at night when I lay in bed. The walls seemed to breathe with it, in and out, the whole house expanding and shrinking like lungs. I tried to stuff rags in my ears, but the sound was not outside. It was in my chest, my bones, my blood. I thought of leaving, of running far from the house, but I could never bring myself to step outside. The front door loomed like a barrier, and whenever I touched the handle, my mother's whisper returned in my mind, warning me. If I left, the silence would not stay behind. It was not bound to the house anymore. It was bound to me. And so I stayed. Days passed in a fog. I stopped eating entirely, the thought of food turning my stomach. The notebooks piled higher on the kitchen table, each one filled with his madness or her warnings. I read until the words blurred, until my vision swam, until I could no longer tell whose voice was whose. Sometimes I would read a passage and realize halfway through that it was not written at all. It was in my head, whispered in the same rhythm as the clock that no longer hung on the wall. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the cellar. They were slow, deliberate, dragging across the stone floor. My throat closed, my heart racing, but I forced myself to rise. I lit the lantern, though my hands shook so badly the flame nearly died, and I crept to the pantry. I opened the panel, the key hot in my hand, and descended once more. The mirror glowed faintly in the lantern light. I froze at the bottom of the stairs because this time there was no mistaking it. There was someone behind the glass. Not my mother, not me. A figure tall and indistinct, made of shifting shadow, its form bending and rippling like smoke. Its head tilted, and though it had no eyes, I felt its gaze pierce me. My body wanted to run, but my feet carried me forward. My hand rose against my will, pressing to the cold glass. The hum surged through me, rattling my bones, making my jaw ache. The figure mirrored my movement, its hand meeting mine on the other side. The glass shivered under our touch, the crack widening slightly, with a sound like ice splitting on a lake. I tore myself away, stumbling back. The lantern swung wildly, throwing shadows across the shelves, and in that chaotic light I saw the jars, clearly, for the first time. They did not only contain bones. Some held scraps of paper, each one with a single word scrawled on it. Names, dozens of names. I recognized some children who had vanished from the village when I was small, girls whispered about in hushed tones, boys whose families had left without warning. He had not kept only bodies here. He had kept their voices. I ran then, clutching the lantern, slamming the panel shut so hard the wall shook. But I could not unsee it. The mirror, the figure, the names, and most of all, the crack that had widened beneath my touch. Don't forget to like, to subscribe, to leave a comment. It keeps me tethered here, keeps me from slipping fully into what waits beyond the glass. The days since have been unbearable. The hum grows louder, the mirrors restless. My reflection no longer waits politely behind the glass. It moves before I do, its lips shaping words I cannot hear. I avoid the cellar, but the silence does not need the cellar any more. It seeps into every corner, curling through the hallways, pressing against me like a tide that will not recede. Last night, I dreamed of my mother again. She stood in the kitchen, the broken clock in her hands, her eyes wide with terror. She opened her mouth, and for the first time I heard her scream, not in warning, not in fear, but in fury. The sound split me awake, the echo still ringing in my ears long after I opened my eyes. And when I stumbled into the kitchen, gasping, I found the clock whole again on the wall, ticking louder than ever. The silence is no longer waiting. It is here. It is in me. And soon it will not be silent at all. Don't forget to comment, to like, to subscribe. Your words are the last ones I still trust to be real. The clock's ticking became unbearable. It was no longer the hesitant twitch of seconds, but a pounding, a heartbeat that did not belong to me. Each jerk of the hand seemed to echo in my chest, pulling my breath out of rhythm. I tried to take it down again, to smash it against the tiles. But when I reached for it, the glass was warm, almost burning, and my reflection in its cracked face did not move as I did. She stayed still, her eyes fixed on me with that same unblinking stare I had seen in the hallway mirror. I stumbled back, clutching my hand, the heat of it searing into my palm as though I had touched living flesh instead of glass. The clock ticked on, louder, and in its sound I began to hear something beneath. A whisper threading through the beat, too faint to catch, yet relentless. Words, perhaps, but not in any language I knew. They scraped against the inside of my skull like claws on stone. I fled into the bedroom, but the silence followed me. The sheets clung to my body like damp skin, the air thick with the scent of mildew and iron. I shut my eyes tight, pressed my hands against my ears, but the hum only grew, vibrating through the mattress, through the frame of the house, through my bones. It was no longer a sound, but a presence, pressing, breathing, waiting. I dreamt, if dream it was, that I lay in the cellar, the mirror towering over me. My mother crouched beside me, her lips moving, but the silence devoured her words before they reached me. Behind her, the shadow figure loomed, its form shifting and folding like smoke, its edges bleeding into the walls until the whole cellar seemed to pulse with its shape. The crack in the glass widened with each tick of the clock until it was no longer a fracture, but a wound, raw and gaping, and something on the other side pressed through. I woke screaming, yet no sound left my throat. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment, because your voices are the only ones keeping me from disappearing completely. I tried to write after that, to anchor myself. I filled page after page with words, scrawled prayers, fragments of memory, anything to prove I still had a voice, even if not spoken aloud. But each morning, when I woke, the pages were blank again. The ink vanished as though swallowed by the paper. My hand cramped from the effort, my nails cracked and bled, but nothing stayed. It was as though the silence reached through the night to erase me, to undo whatever trace I left. The villagers came once, knocking at the door. They said they hadn't seen me in weeks, that smoke no longer rose from the chimney. I stood on the other side, frozen, my hand on the latch. I wanted to open it, to step out into the bright air and scream the truth. But when I parted my lips, nothing came. The silence swelled inside me, pressing against my ribs, and I knew if I opened the door, it would spill out into them, into the world. I stayed still until they left, their footsteps fading down the lane, their voices swallowed by the distance. The cellar called me again. I fought it for days, but the pull grew unbearable, like a hook in my chest. At last I gave in. I lit the lantern, the flame quivering, and descended once more. The mirror stood waiting, its crack wider now, the shimmer of darkness behind it restless and alive. The names in the jars seemed to shift as I passed, letters rearranging, whispering themselves against the glass. Some of them I recognized faces from school, children who had vanished when I was a girl. Their eyes stared at me from the reflections, mouths open in soundless pleas. My mother's notebook lay where I had dropped it last, its cover damp with the cellar's breath. I opened it, desperate, and read the final lines. It will tell you that you are chosen. It will promise to end the hunger if you give yourself. Do not listen. It is not your voice it wants. It is every voice. Once it passes through, it will not stop. It will take the world into silence until nothing remains but itself. I pressed the book to my chest, shaking. Behind me, the hum swelled, rising into a pitch that bent the air. The mirror's surface rippled as though water, and the shadow pressed closer, its form straining against the glass. My mother appeared again, her face pale and strained, her hand lifted in warning. But behind her, the figure's hand overlapped hers, black against her white, the two of them fused in that fractured surface. I screamed, or tried to. My throat tore with the effort, but the silence devoured it, leaving nothing. My reflection in the mirror opened her mouth, and this time she screamed for me, a sound so shrill and endless it made the lantern shatter at my feet. The room plunged into darkness, the mirror glowing faintly on its own. I ran. I don't remember climbing the stairs, only that I found myself collapsed in the kitchen, gasping, the broken clock staring down at me with its fractured face. The ticking had stopped. The silence was absolute. Don't forget to comment, to subscribe, to like your sound, your words. are all that stand between me and what waits behind the glass. The silence is no longer content with the cellar. It has spread into every corner of the house. When I breathe, I feel it pushing back, filling my lungs before air can. When I blink, I see flashes of the mirror, the crack widening, the shadow's hand reaching. The reflections in the covered mirrors stir beneath the fabric, the outlines pressing against the sheets as though they long to step through. I am afraid to sleep. I am afraid to wake. I am afraid most of all that soon there will be no difference between the two. And yet I cannot leave. The door is no longer a door. It is another mirror, its glass surface faint beneath the wood, waiting for me to press my hand to it. If I try, I know it will open, and I will not be the one who steps through. The silence has chosen me, whether I wanted it or not. And when the crack finally breaks, when the glass shatters fully, it will not be me you hear. It will be it. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment. Your voices are the only ones still breaking through, before they too are taken. The silence was no longer a presence outside of me. It had seeped into every chamber of my body. It lived in the hollows between my bones, in the blood that pulsed sluggishly through my veins, in the fragile shell of my lungs. I could feel it every time I tried to breathe, as if I were inhaling not air, but a thick, invisible fog that pressed back against me, refusing to let me feel myself completely. At night, when the house sank into its deeper stillness, I would lie awake and listen, not with my ears, but with something beneath them. My skin seemed to hear, my bones seemed to echo, and always it was the same rhythm. The hum that was not a hum, the voice that was not a voice. I had stopped eating altogether. Hunger no longer gnawed at me, because the silence fed itself on what I denied. My body weakened, but my awareness sharpened into something unnatural. I could see the dust in the air swirling in patterns that looked almost like letters. I could sense the house shifting even when it stood still, as though its walls breathed and flexed with the same rhythm as my chest. When I closed my eyes, I did not see darkness. I saw the crack in the mirror glowing faintly, widening a fraction each time my heart beat. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to like, because your words are the last threads binding me to the world outside this silence. The villagers came again one morning. I heard their voices outside, muffled by distance, though every syllable sounded heavy, distorted, as though it were being dragged across a great distance before reaching me. They called my name, asked if I was well, begged me to answer. I pressed my hands against my ears, but still their voices seeped in, carrying warmth, carrying concern, sounds that felt alien now, foreign, even dangerous. The silence inside me recoiled at them, and in its recoil I felt pain, sharp and stabbing, as though knives had been driven between my ribs. I nearly opened the door then, nearly tore it wide and let their sound rush in, wash me clean. But I saw the wood ripple faintly, like the surface of water, and I remembered my mother's words in the notebook. Once it passes through, it will not stop. The silence was waiting. If I opened the door, it would not be me that greeted them. It would be what lived in me now, spilling into them, taking their voices, their lives, until only the hollow remained. I stayed still, holding my breath until the footsteps faded, until the world outside drifted back into its distance. The house grew darker, though the days outside were bright. Curtains sagged with dust, the glass in the windows clouded, as though filmed over from within. The air thickened, damp with rot. I walked the rooms like a ghost, each step stirring echoes that did not match my movements. Sometimes I caught sight of myself reflected in small, unexpected surfaces, on the rim of a spoon, in the dark sheen of a kettle. My reflection never looked back. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes her mouth opened wider than human lips should, but she never moved in time with me. I could not stay away from the cellar. The mirror pulled me as surely as the tide pulls the sea. I went down again, lantern shaking in my hand, though the flame did not comfort me any more. It only showed more than I wanted to see. The jars had multiplied, or perhaps I had simply noticed them properly now. Each one rattled faintly as I passed, as if something inside shifted, struggling, waiting. The names written on scraps of paper swam before my eyes, letters rearranging themselves into words I could not read but understood nonetheless. They were pleas. They were screams. The mirror stood taller than before. Its crack had widened, jagged edges spreading outward like a spider web. The shadow behind it pressed harder, its shape more defined, more human, though still fluid, shifting wrong. My mother's face no longer appeared. Instead I saw only myself, yet not myself. She, the other me, stood taller, stronger, her eyes hollow but glowing faintly. She pressed her hand against the glass, and I felt the cold sear my palm, though I had not lifted it. I opened my mother's notebook again. The ink had blurred further, the damp air eating away at it, but the words were still legible enough. It will show you yourself. Do not believe it. It is not you. It is what you will become if you yield. I clutched the notebook to my chest, shaking. My reflection smiled at me then, a wide, terrible grin that split her face until the skin tore at the edges. The crack in the mirror widened another fraction with a sound like bone breaking. Don't forget to like, to comment, to subscribe. Your voices are the only ones I still know are real. That night, the silence shifted. It was no longer just soundless. It began to speak. Not in words I could recognize, but in pulses, in vibrations that translated themselves directly into my thoughts. Open, join, become. The messages repeated endlessly, filling my skull until I thought it would split. I pressed my head against the wall, desperate to drive it out, but the wood pulsed with the same rhythm, amplifying it. My hands bled where my nails dug into my scalp, but still the silence whispered. I dreamt again, or perhaps I did not dream at all. I was in the cellar, standing before the mirror. The figure behind the crack stepped closer, pressing its face to the glass. It was mine, my face, my body, but darker, drained of life, its eyes deep wells of shadow. She leaned forward, lips brushing the surface, and though no sound emerged, I felt her words inside me. You are already here. I woke on the floor of the kitchen. The broken clock clutched in my arms, though I had not touched it. Its hands no longer twitched forward. They spun backward, rapid and relentless, the seconds unwinding, pulling me with them. The tick was gone. In its place was breath, deep and slow, filling the kitchen like the lungs of something vast. I screamed then, or tried to. My throat tore, my chest convulsed, but only silence poured out. My reflection in the window screamed for me, her mouth stretched wider and wider, until her teeth cracked and fell like shards of glass. I do not know how long I have left. The crack grows each day. The silence feeds stronger with each breath I take. My mother's warnings circle in my mind, but her sacrifice has already failed. I am the vessel. I am the doorway, and when the mirror breaks, when the silence spills fully through, it will not end here. It will not stop with me. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment, because perhaps your voice can still cut through. Perhaps your sound can still reach me before mine is gone forever. I have lost the sense of days. There is no difference now between morning and night, between sleep and waking, between silence and sound. The house has swallowed time. Shadows linger in corners where no light ever touches, and when I walk from one room to another, the walls seem to close in, then stretch outward again, as if the whole structure were breathing with me, or instead of me. I tried marking the passage of time once, carving notches into the wood of the kitchen table, but each morning the marks had vanished, the surface smooth, as though I had never touched it. I stopped trying. I stopped hoping. The clock ticks no longer. It breathes. Each inhalation is deep, dragging, like bellows filling the lungs of a dying giant. Each exhalation seeps through the walls, rattling the window panes, making the sheets on the bed shift as if stirred by a phantom hand. Sometimes the breath aligns with mine, pulling me into its rhythm until I no longer know if I am breathing or being breathed through. At other times it stumbles, staggers, forcing me into silence, leaving me gasping in the pause, fighting for air that will not come. I keep returning to my mother's notebook, though her words blur more each time I look. The damp has spread, smearing her careful lines until they resemble veins, black threads crawling across the page. I can still read fragments. Do not believe. Not your voice. Hunger without end. Each time I trace the ink with my finger, I feel her presence near, as though she hovers behind me, watching, pleading. But when I turn, it is not her that waits. It is my reflection. She stands where I am not, her lips moving in silence, her eyes glowing faintly as though lit from within. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to like. Your voices are all I have left to remind me that something outside of this house still exists. The cellar has become the center of everything. I try to resist its pull, but resistance is meaningless now. The hum radiates upward, through the floors, through the beams, through the marrow of my bones. I feel it in my teeth, in the hollow beneath my sternum. Even when I shut the panel, when I lock the door and bury the key, the silence rises like water, flooding the rooms until I cannot move without wading through it. At last, I stopped fighting and descended once more, lantern trembling in my hand, though its light has begun to betray me, flickering just when I need it most. The mirror is no longer cracked. It is fractured, its lines spreading outward in a web, glowing faintly like veins of molten metal. The figure behind it is clear now, too clear. It is me. Not just similar, not just a reflection, but me, older, darker, hollow-eyed, her skin pale as ash, her lips torn open by the weight of all the screams I cannot release. She presses her hand to the glass, and though I refuse to lift mine, I feel the cold against my palm, the frost of her touch bleeding through. I hear her voice, not in the air, not in sound, but inside me, vibrating through my thoughts until they are no longer mine. You are ready. You are hollow enough. Open. Let us through. The jars rattle around me, their glass trembling, the names inside whispering themselves in frantic repetition. Some cry, some plead, some scream. I fall to my knees, clutching my ears, though it does no good. The silence is not silence anymore. It is a chorus of stolen voices, layered one over the other, each one trying to speak through me. My mother's warning reverberates. It will promise to end the hunger. Do not believe it. But the hunger grows unbearable. The emptiness inside me aches, demanding to be filled, and her words are fading with every breath. Don't forget to like, to comment, to subscribe. Your sound, your words, they press back against the hollow, even if only for a moment. I tried once more to run. I stumbled up the stairs, through the pantry, into the hallway, but the mirrors had multiplied. Every surface shimmered with glass where there had been none before. The walls themselves reflected me, hundreds of me, each moving slightly out of rhythm. each with a mouth open in silent screams. I fled into the bedroom, threw myself beneath the sheets, but even the fabric gleamed faintly, showing me my face stretched across it, warped and broken. I clawed at it until my nails tore, but there was no escape. The silence has no edges now. It is everywhere. Last night I dreamed, I think it was a dream, that I stood before the mirror one final time. The cracks split wide with a sound like thunder, shards falling inward, vanishing into the dark beyond. My other self stepped through. Her feet touched the stone floor with no sound, her eyes never leaving mine. She reached out, and though I tried to recoil, my body betrayed me. My hand rose, met hers, and where our skin touched, there was no boundary. She slid into me as easily as breath, and the silence roared in triumph. I woke, or perhaps I did not, to find the lantern extinguished, the cellar lit only by the faint glow of the mirror. The reflection was gone. Only darkness remained, shifting, breathing, waiting. I felt it inside me, pressing outward now, not inward. It wants to move through me, into the world. My body shakes with the strain of holding it back. Each breath is a battle. Each second, a fracture closer to breaking. My mother's notebook lies open on the floor. The last line burns in my vision. If you cannot contain it, end yourself, for the silence must not be loosed. I weep as I read it. She bore this burden her entire life, and still it found me. Still it waits, stronger than her, stronger than me. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment. Because if I vanish, if the silence takes me, perhaps your words will be the last trace of me left in this world. I feel it now. The mirror strains behind the walls, behind the windows, behind my eyes. Every breath I take is a crack widening. Every beat of my heart is a drum summoning it forth. The voices inside me no longer scream, they laugh, they whisper, they beg. The hunger wants release. And when the glass shatters completely, when the silence pours out, it will not end with me. It will sweep the world into its hollow, devouring every sound, every word, every breath, until only it remains. If this is the last thing I can leave you, let it be this. Guard your voice. Do not let silence have it. Do not let the hollow take you as it has taken me. And if you hear the hum, if you feel the breath of it pressing at the edges of your thoughts, run. Run and never look into the glass. The crack spreads, the house trembles, the silence rises, and I am almost gone. Don't forget to comment, to subscribe, to like. Before there is nothing left but the hollow, and no voices remain to speak at all.